We are, as you probably know, if you registered for this event, a bunch of students in the departments of statistics and biostatistics here at UW, University of Washington in Seattle. And we are here just doing a student panel for you all. I'm going to start with just a very, very brief introduction in terms of what we're doing and what we're here for, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Okay, so just the slides. These slides are there's only a couple slides just to introduce us. This isn't like a lecture or anything. We just kind of want to have a conversation with you all. But we're going to go over like what are the goals of this event, how you actually participate, who we are, the panelists, and then get to the actual questions. Okay, so our goals are very broad, as you could probably tell by the description of this event. And we just want to like help you answer questions about the process of applying to grad school, what life is like in grad school, should you apply at all, what is the difference between statistics and biostatistics, how do you write a statement of purpose, what is life like as a PhD student, all these sort of questions, very open-ended, and we're just kind of here to present you a variety of perspectives on these questions. So broadly, what we want to do is help spread institutional knowledge about applying. I know for myself personally and for many others, it's kind of a mystical and mysterious process. And we're just kind of hoping to like spread some light onto that process and even the playing field a little bit. And the goal is kind of just to make it a little more accessible, or at least so that people have all the information they need when making the decision on whether or not to apply and how to apply. And we hope that we can become a resource for you as prospective PhD students or master's students. Okay, so this slide is pretty important, so I'm going to go a little slower over this one. So the way you will participate in this is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting, as I'm sure you have all had many, many times. Click Q&A at the bottom of your the little Zoom bar where you like turn on video and mute and stuff like that. Click Q&A, and to submit questions, which you can do right now, and I encourage you to do now while we are waiting, so that we can have some questions ready right for when we get started. Click Q&A at the bottom. You can submit new questions and they will show up for everyone to see. And you can also upvote questions. So we will choose some of the highest upvoted questions and hand them out to our panel and we'll answer them. You can submit questions at any time, including right now. And if you need any technical help or anything like that, please use the chat instead of the Q&A to get technical help. So let's see. I see someone already posted a question, and that's a great question, but can you please post that question using Q&A? It would be great just to test it out. We can start with that if there are no other questions before we get started. Please, okay, great. I see that people are doing that, and we'll let you know as we get going. And you see now that there are questions, you can see little thumbs next to it. That's just a way to tell us this is a question you want us to start with. So this is all for you. This is a service for you as applicants. And if you have a question that everyone wants the answer to, we are going to use that question. Okay, so great. I see a lot of people doing it. Awesome. Okay. As I just mentioned, if you have any issues, please use the chat for that. We'll be using the chat as we go through this just to make sure everyone has it figured out. It looks like people have figured it out pretty quickly, so thank you for that. The expectation is that this lasts about 60 minutes. We may stay a little longer if there are outstanding questions, or if it I don't think it will with this many participants, but if it dies off before then, we can end it earlier too. This event is recorded. That is just so that we can provide this video for other people. What they can see is the panelists and our audio, our video, like they can't see anything from you, but it is recorded just to let you know. Okay, so now we're just going to go over very briefly, because there's a lot of us, 8 panelists here. We're just going to briefly go over who all we are. So for the panelists, I'll ask each of you to just give like a brief, like 10, 15-second introduction into who you are and why you're here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a third year in the statistics program. One thing that I'm kind of passionate about is making grad school accessible for low-income students. And I just want people to know that if you are a low-income student and the application fee is something that is barring you from applying, you can always make sure to look on people's websites, and a lot of schools will have fee waivers if you qualify for like the Pell Grant or other financial aid.
Hi, I'm Anna. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a third year in the statistics department at UW. Yeah. So.
Hi, my name is Angela. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a fourth year in biostats. Went straight from undergrad in Iowa and asked me about what it's like to be in biostats because I am the biostat rep of this panel.
Hi everyone, I'm Anupreet. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a third year student in statistics, and asked me about my experience as an international student applying to grad programs in US and Canada and so on.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian. I'm a sixth year in the Department of Statistics, and you can ask me about work-life balance as a PhD student or how to overcome some of the barriers when you're applying as the first person in your family to pursue a PhD.
Hey everyone, I'm Hassan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a second year in statistics, and I took about 3 years off between undergrad and grad school. So feel free to ask me about what it's like if you're considering working versus going to grad school immediately after undergrad.
Hi everyone, I'm Peter. I'm a fourth year in the statistics program, and I completed a master's when I was finishing up my bachelor's degree. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the difference between master's and PhD programs.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a third year in statistics. Meet a lot of my cohort today. And ask me about the transition from undergrad to graduate school, especially coming from a liberal arts background.
All right, great. So this is actually, there was another recent panel you may or may not have been to. Some of you probably heard about this event from this panel that was hosted by people at Berkeley and Michigan. And independently, we sort of at the same time are planning this. And here's some just like example questions that were left over that they didn't have time for if you want to get started. So if these questions, like, these are just examples of like the kind of questions you can ask. Of course, you can ask anything. If you like these questions, you can use them and post them directly in the Q&A. That's totally fine. But like we can answer questions such as like, what are potential career paths? How do you typically choose programs? Like what sort of background do I need? How should I look for research opportunities? That kind of stuff. So these are just a bunch of examples. I also want to emphasize, I see a couple questions are asking about UW specifically. We are totally happy to answer those questions and will do so. But this event isn't meant to like promote UW necessarily. It is just meant as a way to like provide information from students at UW about stats grad school as a whole. So we are going to try to make this as broadly applicable as possible in your interest. But yeah, we are totally happy to talk about UW if those questions are popular. Okay, and I think that's all I have to say. In terms of the panelists, I also want to let you know, panelists, that you can type answers. So if someone asks a very quick yes or no question, you can type answers just by opening the Q&A yourself and just typing it out. I think most of them are going to be difficult to do that, but we might see a couple where we can just answer in the chat while other people are answering questions. Okay. And so with that done, I see we already have 28 questions up, so plenty of content to go for. And I'm going to pass it over to Alan, who's going to be kind of moderating and helping us distribute questions to panelists in the most helpful way. So Alan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Brian. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try and direct some of these questions to panelists, and hopefully they'll give us some good answers. So the first question I'm seeing from Julian Bernardo, and I've seen a couple of different questions about this, is what kind of research experience did statistics PhD students have while being an undergraduate? I think maybe Anna, could you start us off and see if you have any thoughts about this?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't have a ton of statistics research experience when I was applying to the PhD program, which definitely made it a little bit scary to decide to apply to a stats PhD program. So I went to a liberal arts college. I did a little bit of applied math research with a professor and really enjoyed that. And then I did not major in statistics in undergrad. And it wasn't until sort of my senior year that I thought, wow, I really want to go to statistics grad school. And I did do like a senior thesis that was kind of in statistics, but basically I didn't do that much research experience. And one thing that I would emphasize about statistics is when I was going to apply to the programs, I felt like, how can I even apply? Because I don't know like who I want to work with or what I want to research. Like, and, you know, I've heard that you need to apply directly to a lab when you apply to a PhD program. That's definitely not true for statistics. It's sort of okay to not know exactly what you want to research, especially if you haven't had previous statistics research experiences.
Yeah, thanks so much for that answer, Anna. And since this was kind of a popular question, I think maybe we could hear also from someone who had a larger university experience. So I think Brian, I believe you went to, oh wait, no, sorry, Angela, I think you went to a larger school, right? Do you have any different opinions or anything to add about this?
I mean, I agree with Anna. Like for the most part, I went to the University of Iowa, which is a Big Ten school. So there's, and I think like a RO1 school or whatever. I actually didn't have too much stat research. I had a lot of like biology research which wasn't too relevant. So I think like, you know, if you're applying, I think people on the admission committees are aware that there actually aren't that many statistics research opportunities available, but you know, I think they just want to see some passion in math and stats, and that's like strong enough for them sometimes.
Awesome, thank you so much. The next question that I'm seeing a lot of encouragement for is about how to write a personal statement. And so I'm curious if people have opinions on this. So it says, in the statements, we are encouraged to write about why we would make a great fit in that program. What types of things can we emphasize? And what makes a great fit to the program you're in at University of Washington? So maybe Hassan, I think you are probably the youngest of us. Maybe this is most fresh in your mind. Do you have any thoughts about this question?
Yeah, sure. So I think for the most part, to make this easier on you when you're applying, I would keep your statement of purpose relatively general because it's mainly about you. It's not about the program that you're applying to. And then as far as like research interests go for specific programs, I would definitely encourage you to look at different professors' websites. Most professors have websites that describe their research, and you can even browse through the articles and see what sounds interesting to you. But I think for the most part, think about what you're interested in independently of the school that you're applying to, and just try to be authentic with why you think it would be a good fit for the program. I don't think anybody's expecting you to know exactly what type of research you're going to do or know exactly why you would be a good fit for the program, but it would definitely come out if you're being authentic with your own interests.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. And I believe, Brian, you've actually served on committees that look at the applications. Do you have any opinions from the other end where you're actually looking at these statements to see what works well and what doesn't work well for you?
Yeah, I do. So first, let me start a little specific actually, which is that these are a little different than college application essays, and I think some of the weaker ones reflect very closely college application essays. Like if you go way deep into like, you know, when I was 3 years old, I always knew I wanted to be a statistician kind of thing. There's a lot of like cliches like that you see that are kind of good to avoid. I also do want to emphasize that this is very far from the most important thing in your application. Schools will use it, but and in my opinion, I think the most important role of the statement of purpose is to express interest in that specific program. Like you should talk about your background and like what motivates you to do statistics, but also schools want to know, like, do you actually care about the specific school you're applying to? If you apply to UW and you give us a statement of purpose and it's all about like Duke and you forgot to remove that, like that's going to be probably a red flag to the admissions committee that you didn't spend a lot of time on our specific school. So what I think is good is to write a statement that's largely about yourself. And then what I did that was somewhat successful was to have a couple paragraphs at the end where I like name dropped a few professors. I talked about like, oh, this professor's research interests me because XYZ. And I'm also interested, like for UW, I'm also interested in like the machine learning and big data track, just to show a little bit that you've done a little research about the institution. I mean, you're not going to know certain things like some older faculty might be leaving or whether someone is accepting students right now, and that's totally okay. but what they really want to see is just that you've done your research about the institution and that you know overall like what you're looking for and whether that's a good fit for the program.
Great. Yeah, that was really awesome. I guess this is something really important, and I guess this question was in particular about what you could do to show that you're a good fit for this program. Do people have other opinions about general things that you can do in your application to make yourself stand out? Maybe Peter, do you have any suggestions about how to make yourself stand out in applications generally, maybe not even in this exact context?
Yeah. Tough question. So, I believe that, there is a lot of work you can do to sort of try to understand like what certain departments are known for. Part of that is, the chore of going to a department's website and trying to figure out like what do professors there seem to research and how might that align with your interest. But, I think that oftentimes that is sort of information that's hard to get at. So if possible, like, if you have professors in your university who you can talk to and try to get a sense of that, that can help. That can be a really helpful resource as well. I'm sure that people here on this panel would be open to answering questions as well. But in general, there is a bit of, a sort of personal aspect of this where you have to figure out like, why am I going to graduate school? What particularly am I looking for? It's not necessarily like, how can I tailor myself to each school? Like, yes, there is a bit of that, but you should also be thinking particularly about like, what do I want to get out of a master's? What do I want to get out of a PhD? That sort of thing. And knowing that, once you know that, that can really help you figure out like why you want to go to a particular school.
Yeah, thanks for your great perspective, Peter. So I'm seeing now that one of the top questions is how you decide if you're a better fit for statistics or biostatistics. So I think I'd like to turn it to Angela to kind of explain how her thought process was in that situation, and what do you think that you made a right choice, or what are some tidbits of advice that you would give to someone making this decision now?
Thanks, Alan. So I would say that my case was maybe slightly unique because I was a double major in biochemistry and statistics. So I definitely wanted to go into something that had a strong biological focus to it. I mean, I later learned that there's not that much bio and biostats, but there is actually a lot that encompasses it. So like, for example, I think if you're more interested in doing more applied work, I mean, there's certainly opportunities in statistics, and I know a lot of you guys can probably correct me. But if you want to do more applied work, I think biostats generally leans more applied, even though like there are actually plenty of opportunities to pursue theory work, especially in our department in Seattle. If you have a focus, like if you're really interested in like epidemiology or like the application of statistics in like global health, public health, clinical trials, survival analysis, that stuff lies pretty firmly within biostats. And so I don't know, Alan, is there anything else you want me to add? Or have I covered it okay?
Do you think that generally there's kind of structural differences between biostatistics and statistics in terms of like what classes you take, what kind of jobs you can get afterwards? Are there any considerations like that for you?
Yeah, that's a good point. So in terms of classes, I can't comment on other programs, but at UW, we take all our theory classes and a lot of our core classes with the stat department. So there are no differences in classes that way. I think in other programs, this biostat department may teach the theory class, but I think they're equally like difficult and theoretical than like the stat department. In terms of jobs, yeah, I guess like you'll see biostatisticians in roles like, like clinical trials, like pharmaceutical companies and whatnot. But I think there's also a lot of flexibility. I know plenty of people who've gone into tech, into government, into academia, all with biostat degrees. So I guess it could offer you a little bit more flexibility. But I guess like the main difference is maybe there might be more opportunities in like biotech fields and pharmaceutical companies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really valuable perspective to have. So the next question I'm seeing is about kind of how you manage your relationship with your supervisor in academia. And so it looks like the direct text says there have been many number of articles recently about abusive behaviors by supervisors in academia. What are some strategies for avoiding signing up with an abusive advisor? And if you do end up with one, does the UW allow you to switch very easily? So it looks like maybe Sarah is interested in answering this question. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I do. So just to preface this, I don't know of any such advisors in our department or in biostats. So I want to mix it a little more general about just like, can you switch advisors once you have someone? Like, how do you do that? How do you like figure out like who might be a good advisor for you? And I think to start with this, a really good resource is current students. I think whenever you're considering working with a new person, I think it is really useful to figure out who currently works with them and just check in with them, say like, hey, what's your experience with this person? How do you like working with them? Like, how are your meetings structured? Those kind of things. I think most students would be really happy to like talk with you and tell you about their experience, whether it's good or bad. So I think that's really important. I think also just like, at least in our department, people switch advisors a lot. Less often for like huge personality issues, but more like they'll try something out and say like, oh, I don't love this. Like, I want to try something else. So I think for that, it's good to start early with like very more like low commitment projects if possible, or to like just read with the professor in order to get a sense of like how they work without really committing to like doing everything with them. But also like I can speak from experience, like I've changed who I like thought my advisor would be. I've worked with 2 different professors. A lot of us have. So who you start with is definitely not who you're going to end up with. And I think it's relatively easy to switch. But if you are in a situation where like someone's actually like abusive in some setting, I think it's really important to like report that to staff or faculty members.
If I can touch on this too, Alan, I just want to point out quickly that statistics and mathematical sciences are a little bit different than lab sciences. A lot of times in lab sciences, when you apply to grad school, you're admitted like straight to a lab, for example, and you are like pretty strongly committed to that lab, and switching labs is a very, very big procedure. I think in statistics generally, and I know for a fact this is true at UW and also from some friends at other schools, it is a little easier to change. I mean, it's still a process you have to go through and it still can be difficult, but because you are not like working in someone's lab and maybe in your first couple of years, like you might be a TA or something, it can be a little less commitment at first. And for the most part, faculty, in my experience, I switched advisors as well, have been pretty okay with people taking the time to figure out what they want to be doing for their PhD.
Alan, can I also quickly add something specifically to
absolutely.
biostats? Thanks.
Yeah, totally.
So in terms of like, I think the 2 panelists have touched on the topic of like switching advisors like very well. In terms of like abusive behavior caused by advisors, I think like, you know that you're not the only person. If you experience that, you're probably not the only person. So specifically in biostats, we have set up a student advocate position. So what this is there is a faculty member whose main purpose is to support the student and address concerns that the student might face. And something that like would be perfect, like I say perfect, kind of like in quotes, for talking to a student, the student advocate would be like reporting abusive behavior by professors. So like someone mentioned, like, yeah, you can talk to staff, but at least in biostats, we have like a person who is meant for this. So something to consider when you're choosing programs. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angela. That sounds like a really wonderful program that they have in biostatistics. So I'm looking at these questions and it looks like some of the next questions might have to do with thinking about master's programs compared to PhD programs and kind of the transition between these. I don't know I think, Peter, you might have actually done a master's before your PhD. Do you have any comments about the differences between master's and PhD, and how did your master's prepare you to come here?
I guess that the first thing I'd say is if you're thinking about graduate school, you want to think really, really hard about why you're going to graduate school. And there are probably 3 or 4 big differences between master's and PhD programs. And the first is probably cost. A lot of master's programs, they're much harder to get scholarships for and can be quite expensive depending on whether you go to a public school or private school and that sort of thing. Most PhD programs, on the other hand, will give you funding in the form of a stipend, like a yearly salary, essentially, in order to, if you do research or you serve as a teaching assistant. So the first thing to think about, of course, is money. Is this, something that, is a master's program available to you? The next thing is probably time. Most master's programs finish within 2 years, whereas a PhD program, I think you can tend to expect 5 to 6 years at most programs. And then finally, it's a matter of sort of like what do you want out of your degree in the end? So, with a master's degree, you can often find positions, working in industry, but for example, you're not going to get a teaching position as like a research professor at like an R1 university or like a big, state university. So, in some sense, the PhD being the longer program, provides you or prepares you for that sort of career leading your own research lab. And you can find that maybe at the academic, like in an academic setting or in an industry setting. So those are probably like the fundamental differences between master's and PhD programs. But a lot of people do enter master's programs with the plan of using that as a bit of a springboard for a PhD program in the future. So for example, when I entered my master's program, it was essentially a joint program. So in the 4th year of undergraduate, I did both. I finished my bachelor's and my master's degree at the same time. And I sort of knew at that time that I wanted to pursue a PhD. So with that in mind, I was able to sort of structure my master's degree to take more of the classes that I thought would help me through a PhD, whereas some of my master's cohort like classmates took more of the classes that they thought would be more immediately marketable and help them get jobs in industry immediately following the master's. So in that sense, a master's program can be really either. And my ultimate advice is really just like be very clear with yourself about like what you want, and you can shape a master's program to be, to find, research experiences and to prepare yourself for a PhD program, but you may have to be more proactive because, if you enter into a PhD program, it's sort of, expected that you will do research. It's, the department will probably spend more effort into trying to prepare you for a research career, whereas they might not be aware that like all masters, like some master students do want to do research, some master students don't. So, you have to be very proactive about what you want.
Yeah, thank you so much for that really great perspective, Peter. So I think that actually is a really great transition to one of the next questions. You mentioned how you can kind of think about going to jobs through a master's versus doing a PhD. I know that Anupreet, you've actually worked before you came to your PhD. So one of these questions is, has anyone applied to the PhD after some years of working? How does that change the application process compared to applying right out of undergrad? Anupreet, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things to consider is like how long of work experience do you have? So I did my undergrad and master's, and then I worked for a year at an investment banking company. And I finally kind of decided that, okay, this is the right time after working for a year, gaining the corporate experience to come into the PhD program. So I personally think that because my work period was so short, it didn't really change a whole lot in my application, because I was mostly highlighting like my undergrad experience and research experience, and then focusing a little bit on the work experience. If you have worked for a while, I still don't think that there's a lot of change in the application process. If your job is anyway related to statistics or biostatistics, you should definitely highlight that, because that gives your application a boost in terms of the fact that you have worked before, so you have some kind of industry experience. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you have worked in a job which kind of portrays a good picture in terms of your stats or biostats application, definitely do it. Do mention it in the application.
Awesome.
Alan.
Oh, yes,
can
I was
jump
actually
in?
just about to ask you if you had any other comments about this, Hassan. I know you've also worked a little bit before coming over to grad school.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So yeah, I agree with everything Anupreet said, and I want to emphasize that your decision to go to grad school versus to work after undergrad should be like your decision based on what you want out of your future career. I had an advisor really discourage me from working after undergrad, saying that it would put me behind if I were to choose to go to grad school. And in the long run, I don't think that was really good advice at all. My decision to go work instead of go immediately into grad school was because I felt a little burnt out by school by the end of undergrad. And I think taking those few years off really allowed me to like refocus my energy into being a student again, especially if you're deciding to go into the PhD. And as far as like how that changed my application, I was fortunate enough to have a job that was more quantitative and statistical by nature. And I was working with people who had masters and PhDs in statistics, so they really helped me like with my application writing process and how I should frame my job into what professors who are in admissions would want to read. But definitely lean on like both your mentors from undergrad and your mentors in your job when you do decide to go back into grad school. And I would also just say, if you decide to go into industry, to like keep a relationship with your professors from undergrad that you were close to. That will definitely make it easier to ask them in the long run for a letter of recommendation, because I think there is an expectation that you should have a letter of recommendation from people you went to school with and people you worked with when you are going to apply to grad school in the long run.
Great. It's really wonderful to hear from people who have had such a wide array of experiences. So the next question relates to, again, kind of what background people had before they came over to grad school. And so this question specifically asks, what type of math background is required or preferred for admission to the statistics PhD program? Sarah, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, so I was a statistics major in undergrad, but I think there actually are like fewer statistics like requirements for getting into statistics PhD programs. I think what's more important actually is the math background. And as most schools for acceptance expect that you've taken the calculus sequence, they expect linear algebra, and often at least one course in real analysis. So I think real analysis is a thing that like people might be missing the most or like not realize is so important, but that is an expectation of a lot of programs that you've taken at least one course, and it can help to take more than one course. Master's programs might not necessarily expect that. But yeah, I think those are like the only like courses that people really look for. Other math courses are great to see, but like not required. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on this though.
Yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts about the math background? I guess for me, it seems like, having some math background is definitely good, but it's certainly not a necessity to be, the math wizard to be admitted into statistics.
Oh, sorry, there's a second half of the question about how to build those skills up if you only took intro classes in undergrad. I think this is one setting where like a master's program could be useful if you do have the time and funds to actually do a master's program, I think that is one really good way to like build up those skills, to take the courses and show that you can handle math coursework. I think another option is trying to find a job that would pay for you to like take a course or two along with your job. I know some like data science programs, like when I was in undergrad, there was a Mass Mutual nearby that had a relationship with the college, and they had a program where they would pay for someone to get their master's in stats. So I think looking for jobs where they might pay for you to take 1 or 2 classes so you can catch up on a math background is one option.
I also just want to briefly mention, in terms of applications, the math classes that you take, like those are the ones where your grades are going to be most heavily considered. Like having been on a few admissions committees, I can tell you that like they look at your overall GPA, but what they're really looking at is like, how did you do in your math classes, and in particular in like your in stat classes, like your upper level ones in particular. And they'll look for things like linear algebra and real analysis and things like that, which isn't to say that they're like strictly required, or don't feel like, oh no, I got to be in real analysis, am I doomed? But just to say that like your other classes are far underweighted compared to those classes when it comes to admissions decisions.
Great, thank you so much. So this next question has to do with trying to learn about different schools and different resources that are available for that. I guess, again, Hassan, you are the most recent applicant. Do you remember what kind of resources you looked for when you looked to investigate these different schools?
Yeah, so like I think I said earlier, I was on a team in my job with people who had attended grad school in statistics before. So I was really fortunate to be able to lean on them, asking them what their experience was like at their respective schools. I think inevitably all applicants end up going to the US News reports and like looking at rankings and things like that. I wouldn't put too much weight on where a program falls in on that ranking. I think the most informative tool that really helped me choose the schools to apply to were just going to each department's website and reading different professors' research interests and trying to get a feel for what the department emphasizes based on what they have written on the website. I think for the most part, those tend to be pretty accurate. And when you're thinking about specific professors to research with, then it's always a good idea to just look on their website, see what their recent publications are in, and try to go from there. I try to stay away from things like Grad Cafe just because they really heightened my anxiety. But if that's something that's helpful for you, then by all means.
And
If I could just, oh, sorry.
Sorry, and Hassan, could you maybe just mention how many schools you ended up applying to?
Yeah, I think I ended up applying to about 10 schools. And part of that was also I am originally from North Carolina, and North Carolina had a lot of really great schools. So I applied to all 3 of the big schools there just to try to be closer to family.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Anna, I think you might have had a comment that you wanted to add.
Yeah, this might be like sort of a hot take, but like when I was applying to grad school, all anyone told me for the question of like, how do I find a school that's a good fit was go to faculty's websites, like read about faculty's websites, see what they're doing research in. And I actually found that extremely stressful and unhelpful because I would open a website and it's like, first of all, I don't know what I want to research yet. So how do I know? And then I would try to click, like I would just like see phrases and be like, I don't even know what that is, like manifold learning, what's a manifold? And then I'd click on a paper to try to be like, can I learn more about this, and not understand anything in the paper. Anyway, the point of all this is that part of your first 2 years of grad school is figuring out what you want to research and taking enough classes to be able to understand the research interests of professors. So I do think that especially if you're coming straight from undergrad and you're really excited about statistics, but don't have a particular field of interest yet, the like read professors' websites advice might not be hugely useful. But I think that like just trying to apply to like a diverse mix of schools, like, you know, oh, this department looks big and they seem to have a lot of applications. This department looks small. I don't know, maybe that would be okay. And just kind of trying to get a big mix of departments. And then after you get into places, you can go to visit day. And that's a really good way to gauge department vibes. Also, there's nothing wrong with like saying, I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life somewhere. I want to be in a city, or I want to be in a more rural area. I think those are all also important factors.
Great, thanks so much. So the next question was, oh, sorry.
Alan, can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're fine. I also just wanted to mention that a lot of people worry if they write something in their statement of purpose that means they're like committed to it. And I just want to emphasize that that's very much not true at all. It might be used for like recruiting RAs, research assistants for the first year, just to like gauge your overall interest. But if you say like, oh, I want to work with Professor so-and-so, or, oh, I'm interested in the social sciences, that doesn't mean that they're going to accept you contingent on the fact that you work in the social sciences or that you work with Professor so-and-so. So don't be afraid to like talk about like what your general interests are without feeling like you're committing yourself to your next path. And I also want to add to what Anna said at the very end there, like don't underemphasize location. I think one of the best services that my undergraduate advisors gave to me is that like you're going to be there for a very long time, and it's important that you are a place that like you want to live and that makes you happy. And that can look different for a lot of different people, but that is like that's a real consideration that I think people underemphasize a little bit in their schools.
Great, thank you. So I think the next question looks like it's going to be again about mentoring. So Zachary asks, when did you figure out who your mentor was going to be, and what were some considerations that you had for choosing a mentor? And maybe Anupreet, do you have any specific insights about this?
Yeah, for sure. So UW has this unique system about like where we do coursework in the first 2 years, and then we decide the mentors after like doing some research experience and giving our prelims. But like different schools and different programs have a totally different way of choosing your mentors. And what I would like to emphasize is that choosing your mentors is a tricky but an important part of your PhD, where you need to see that it is both a good match in terms of your academic interest, but also a good match in terms of like just working and collaborating together. So obviously, one good way of choosing a mentor is to try in the first 2 years when you're just doing like a coursework, just try out going to working groups, reading groups of different professors in a particular department, trying to hear their research interests, trying to talk to more students of those professors, and that way try to understand if that would be a good fit for you. And I do want to emphasize again that in most of the schools, it is nowadays not a compulsory thing that you have to stick with a mentor all throughout the 5 years. So at any point, again, if you feel that your research interest paths are diverging, you can always kind of choose a different mentor at some point to do more projects.
Can I add to that, Alan? I've thought about this a lot because I came into grad school really interested in one person in our department and worked with them for 2 years and decided that it wasn't quite the right match for me, and I'm now working with someone else. So I personally think there are like 3 important things to consider. The first, which is more obvious, is research fit. Like, are you interested in the work they do? Like, do you find it motivating? Do you want to work on these types of problems? I think the second is just like personality fit. Like, do you like this person? Do you feel comfortable with them? I think it's really important to like feel comfortable going into a meeting and asking questions, not being nervous or I don't know. I think it's really important to have an advisor that you like. And then third, so for me, both of these 2 things were fulfilled by my first advisor. But the third thing is like, how do your research styles and like working styles fit together? So for me, I've learned that I like to have someone who's pretty hands-on. I like to have someone who like, if I send them a report, we'll read it every week and come to meetings prepared with feedback and that kind of thing. And for me, it's helpful to have someone who's like constantly like checking in and making sure that I'm actually meeting my goals. So my first advisor was someone who's very different. He was very hands-off, and generally like let me do whatever I wanted, but also didn't check in a lot. And I think understanding what works better for you, and this is something I think you'll figure out as you like start doing research, thinking about like what works for you, and also like what is a person who can help you get towards getting a PhD, because it's a very long process. You need someone who's going to support you getting there. So I think that third piece is really important and something to consider as you like start working with someone. Like, is this a good fit? And do I think this person can like support me throughout the entire process of a PhD?
I just wanted to add one smaller addition to what everyone said. I think there's also a few professors that have more lab style environments where they have a big research group versus some professors that may be advising a few students, but really work individually one-on-one with these students. So also take that into consideration. Like if you want to be in an area where you may be collaborating with another student or two along with your advisor versus working more individually with your advisor. And I think that decision really comes down to like you trying out both ways or having that research experience from your past and seeing what really works better for you.
Great, thanks so much.
If I can say one more thing.
Yeah, go for it.
At this point, you probably do not know exactly who you'd like to work with, but if you think you do, I would strongly encourage you apply to a lot of schools where you can identify multiple professors that you'd be interested in working with. And if there's one person you absolutely must work with, might as well reach out to them and just see what's going on with them to figure out like if that's a possibility. I really think like keep your options open and definitely choose a school or schools where you feel like there are multiple professors doing the kind of work that would be interesting to you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for all of your different opinions about that. So I'm seeing a couple of questions again about the application process. So there's a question asking about the difference between the statement of purpose and the personal statement. And so I'm curious if people have thoughts about what you put in your personal statement versus what you put in a statement of purpose. And maybe Angela, do you have any thoughts about that in particular?
Can you all hear me? I had some trouble with my microphone earlier. Anyway, I think for the most part, they are fairly interchangeable. I know that UW did actually have does actually have a personal statement in its application, and the individual departments will have a research statement. So obviously in your research statement, you should state like why you want to go into biostatistics or statistics and potentially any research experience you have. And also like how like maybe like what you want to work on potentially in the specific program. And at UW, the personal statement is more, it's as the name implies, more personal. So I think it states like, is there anything about your background, like whether or not like, are you from an underrepresented minority, or are you like a first generation student? And like, I think it kind of asks you to like write about how those experiences have shaped why you want to apply to grad school. I think at UW specifically, you can state like, I have not had any like anything like that. Like you can just write one sentence, like I do not have any experiences that like make me stand out or something. And like, that's fine. And I think that kind of statement, at least from what I've heard in biostats, I think it's read, but it's not like it doesn't play a huge role in whether or not you get admitted if you don't have any like said experiences. Did that answer? And everyone wants to add in, like feel free.
Yeah, I want to add one thing. I do want to say that like I don't think that that statement can hurt you very much, but I do think it can help you a little bit. So like like it's not like they don't care about it. It's just that like if you're reading this and stressing like, oh no, I don't have like the background they want, that's fine. Some places don't require it at all. But another thing you can do is just write about how you've like thought about these things, or what your opinions and thoughts are on the things that they're asking about. And I think actually UW just this year changed their prompt to more explicitly do that, because we were getting a bunch of people who just wrote that like one sentence thing. And it's not just that we want to like represent about like want you to talk about like like your demographic information or something, which like a lot of people thought it was. It's more so that like we want to know that like people have thought about this. And like I do think it's probably, of the letters, perhaps the least weighted of the three. But again, I think it can mostly serve as a way to make you stand out more, and having like a weaker letter in this regard like won't hurt you in the same way as having like a weak research letter might.
Great, thank you so much for all of that advice. So actually, going off of that, one of the questions I'm seeing now is for the women on the panel. Could you talk about your experience being a woman in a predominantly male department? And Anna, maybe you could give some thoughts about this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I would say definitely like women are a little underrepresented in the UW stats department. That was true at other programs that I visited as well. I'm not sure I have any like super strong thoughts or like huge things to say about it. One thing I will say is that one thing that I found really helpful is that at UW we take our core classes all with biostat. And that one reason that's pretty nice is like if our classes had only been in the stats department, there would have been only a few women in each of our classes, like for the cohort that Sarah and I are in. But like, just because we mix with biostat, it just makes more of a critical mass of women. So I would say that like, it's not something I notice as much. Also, we have like a lot of female professors, and we have a group called WIBS, which is Women in Biostatistics and Statistics. We have a Zoom lunch tomorrow. That should be fun. But yeah, I actually don't have anything like hugely groundbreaking to say. Maybe Sarah has other thoughts.
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. I mean, first of all, like as a white woman whose parents went to grad school, I think like I have had certain barriers as a woman, but like not others. So I think that is really important to like for me to be aware of. I think for me, like I went in undergrad, like women were like equally represented in stat, and then I came here and was like pretty shocked that there were so few. And yeah, I think that is honestly one consideration between stats and biostats. Like in the field of biostats, there are way more women. And for some people, like that is an advantage of a biostats program. I think also for me, I found that like I've found good mentors like through this group WIBS, or just like I think there have been women in the department, because there are relatively few, who are much more willing to like spend time with me and like talk through different aspects of grad school and take on that mentoring opportunity. And I think I feel that way a lot about like incoming first years, that like I care a lot about spending time with women who are coming to the program and talking about like my experience with them. So I think it does open up like different like mentorship opportunities. Yeah, I don't know. I think imposter syndrome is a thing, and I think that's something that like often affects groups who are underrepresented in statistics. And I think it's important just to like keep going, find mentors in students and faculty. And yeah, look at how many women are faculty in the department. I think that tells you a lot about the department culture. There's some places where it might be like 2 who are tenured. There might be 4 in other places. There might be none in other places. Like, I think that's, for me, was a consideration.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about this? Okay, well, if not, it looks like we're getting close to our hour. And so to be respectful of time, we'll probably stick around a little bit after, but in case anyone needs to leave right at the hour, I thought maybe one thing we could do is just we could each quickly go around and give one piece of advice that we would like to give to a prospective student, whatever you think you would have liked to hear as a prospective student. And why don't we start with Brian? You're just on the first person on my screen.
Sure. So one thing I would say is to take advantage of the mentors that you have wherever you are now. Some of the most helpful people for me when I was applying were my professors in undergrad, and did apply straight from undergrad. So that was helpful in that regard. But just in terms of having people like read your statements and like let you know, reaching out to that network is really, really helpful. And sometimes like if you don't have as close relationships with your professors, they might point you to someone else. Like I've had students forwarded to me from professors that I've worked with before, and I help those students out. So even if they can't help you directly, they might be able to point you to resources that can help you, because these are all people who have gone through this before. So it is like kind of a stressful, scary process, especially if you're like not as familiar with it because maybe your parents didn't go through it. But reach out to people you know who did.
Yeah, I guess I'm next on my screen, so I'll give my piece of advice, and it's just that if you're a low income student, definitely don't make the cost kind of a barrier. If this is something you're interested in, there's a lot of different ways that you can reduce the cost by applying for fee waivers and things like that. It's very frustrating because sometimes it's a little hard to get access to these resources, but a lot of schools do have them, and you just have to look, and you undoubtedly have to face a lot of barriers if you're a low income student, but it is possible, and you should definitely look out for those and try and research the options out there. I think Peter, you're next on my screen. Do you have some quick advice for students?
Sure. I guess I saw some questions that were sort of like, oh, what kind of job can I expect after a master's degree or PhD degree or something like that. And my ultimate advice there is like, the question is really about like, what can you in particular expect after you do your master's or do your PhD, right? So I think it's really important to think that like, you have to see like, can you make a master's program work for you? Can you make a PhD program work for you? And it's not just necessarily about like, being able to do like some sort of research that you really want to do. It's also about, the lifestyle and like finding a place where you can fit and feel, supported, right? So just be really aware that, there isn't any one path through grad school. And this is a really crucial time in your life to be thinking about like, what exactly do you want for yourself?
Thanks. Anupreet, you're next on my screen. Do you have any tidbits of advice?
Yeah, so one advice that I would give is that, everyone knows that application process is very stressful, but the important thing is that you take one thing at a time, one application at a time, and do a good job at it. Don't like necessarily follow US news rankings and so on. I know a lot of people use those as proxies, but important thing is your research fit to the department and to the professors you're interested in working with, rather than like just the reputation of the school. So I would advise you to like look at your research fit and what you can contribute to as part of the department, and how that department can help in growing you as a better researcher.
Anna, you're next on my screen. Do you have any advice quickly?
Yeah, so like I said a little bit at the very beginning of this meeting, like, oh, it's totally okay to like apply to grad school, even if you don't really know what statistics research is. And I basically stand by that advice. But of course, that's terrible advice if I was just telling everyone everywhere, like, oh yeah, apply to stats grad school, like, even if you don't know anything about statistics. So I think I saw a few questions in the chat related sort of to like, how do I know if I should apply to grad school or work first and stuff like that? And I think a really big part of that equation that's like underemphasized is like, okay, if I go to grad school, what will my day-to-day look like? And does that sound good? And like for me, my favorite part of undergrad was like TAing and tutoring. And I knew that if I decided to go to a PhD program, my income would likely come from like TAing in the first few years. And I thought that like literally sounded more fun than like a job in tech or a job in consulting or anything. So that made it like, for me, sort of a no-brainer, even though I didn't feel like my research interests were totally pinned down or like whatever. It was like, oh, I think grad school is the right choice for me. So yeah, I think that's like underemphasized a little, is like, think about what the day-to-day of grad school is. If you think that some job in industry like sounds like more fun on a day-to-day and you're on the fence about if you really want a PhD, I would like think twice about like, should I really apply like this year?
Great. Hassan, I guess we are over our hour, so if anyone does need to go, I'm so sorry that didn't manage the time perfectly here. But if anyone needs to go, that's totally okay. But if not, we would love to hear from the rest of our panelists about their tidbits of advice. And Hassan, I think you're next on my screen.
Sure. So mine is a little bit more practical. Don't do find and replace on your essays when you're just like changing, school abbreviations and stuff like that. I ended up with the word reproducibility or something like that in one of my essays. So yeah, don't do that. Definitely read through your essays like in detail, maybe read them aloud too to make sure that they work out. And I know a lot of schools have deadlines that are really close to each other. And in that case, I'd just say save different files for each school, just so that you don't get it, mixed up.
Thank you for that really important tidbit of information, Hassan. Sarah, you're next on my screen. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I think in general, what grad schools are looking for are people who have potential to do really good research. Like they're not looking for someone who's necessarily the best student or would like already did a ton of high impact research. Like I wouldn't count yourself out if you think, oh, like I did like a small research experience, but I didn't get anything from it, or I got that B in my analysis class one year, because like they're not necessarily looking for someone who was perfect in undergrad. They're looking for someone who could contribute to the field of statistics and contribute to their department. So I basically like don't count yourself out of going to grad school or getting a PhD if you think like, well, I'm not like the best statistics student who's ever gone to my undergrad. Like I think I thought like that a lot. I was like, oh, like why would a school admit me over like this person I work with who is way better at this class than I am? And I think like that thinking was not very helpful for me. And I think like having talked to professors and like heard people from the admissions committee, like they aren't necessarily looking for that perfect student. They're just looking for students who would be good fits for them.
Awesome. And I'm so sorry we saved the best for last. Angela, what do you have to say?
Thanks, Alan. I think everyone gave really great advice. I especially want to emphasize Alan's advice because applying to grad school was super expensive and I was a broke undergrad. So, and I really wish I had taken advantage of some of the fee waivers that schools offer. I know that UW specifically also offers a fee waiver. In terms of advice, this is maybe not so important to applying to school, but later on when you're doing interviews and visit days, like talk to the students. Like the students will let you know if they enjoy the program. Like I guess there is like a slight air of them trying to sell the school to you, but like if you catch them like without any professors nearby, they'll tell you the truth. And that was really helpful for me when I was trying to choose programs as well.
Awesome. Well, that concludes kind of the scheduled time that we have. And so we wanted to give a good conclusion to anyone who did have things going on after this, but we will continue answering questions for people who want to stick around or didn't have their question answered yet. So I guess what I'll do is I'll ask a couple more questions from this, or if any of the other panelists see questions that they think are really impactful and they want to answer, you can feel free to jump right in right now, honestly. If not, I think one question that stood out to me was kind of, we talked about how you can transition from being in a job to going to a PhD, but one thing that I guess we didn't really talk about was how do you choose actually if you want to just stay in a job versus going to a PhD? What are some trade-offs that you've experienced coming to a PhD? Like, was the lifestyle change really big? Was the move important? What about the work style? And maybe Anupreet, I think, why don't you go ahead and start us off with that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it is definitely a big change to go into a PhD program. And one has to get back. Like for me, it was kind of particularly difficult to move from job back to PhD, trying to get back into academic mode. But I feel like different programs have different ways of kind of making their students more comfortable when they join in their first year. Like UW usually offers like a very intro to statistics course for everyone so that it creates a level playing field. And I think a lot of other programs also do the same thing. In terms of like work style and like work-life balance and so on, I think the first 2 years, you definitely have seem to have like more work in terms of coursework because you have like homework deadlines and so on. But it is important like that you have a healthy working environment right from the beginning of your PhD, and you try to maintain a good work-life balance rather than like just trying to achieve everything in the first 2 years, because you do have 5 years to explore your research interests, to explore whatever you want to do with your PhD. So I would in general advise that take it easy and try to do one thing at a time, and that would really help you in making a smooth transition.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? Cool.
This is actually unrelated, Alan, but I just want to tell to the so a lot of people are still around, which is great, I think, and we're going to stick around and answer more questions. One thing I might suggest just to help us like make sure before we have to go, you get your biggest questions answered is if you see things that were like particularly pressing or common themes in the Q&A, like you can look at that just as well as we can. Feel free to let us know or like ping us in the chat if we like didn't fully answer a question. Like, do you want us to spend more time on research? Do you want us to spend more time on the statement of purpose? Like, feel free to let us know in the chat. I mean, we're trying to manage this live as best we can, but especially for those of you who are like still around and have like presumably have more questions you want answered, let us know. Let us know, and we will make sure that we can get to as many as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 of the questions that, and yes, absolutely. If any of you have questions you really want answered, feel free to put it in the chat. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A. They can get kind of flooded out. So 2 of the questions I'm seeing right now in the Q&A are about what the day-to-day life is like as a PhD student. So someone asked, what's the balance of coursework and research in your first couple of years? And while you're answering this, maybe you can also answer this other question that says, how many hours a week would you say you spend on the program on average? And maybe Peter, could you give some comments about this?
Sure. I'll start by saying for the first year since I entered with a master's, I only did 1 year of extremely heavy coursework. So during that first year, basically all my time was devoted to coursework or TAing. So I did almost no research until the summer. The question of how many hours you can expect to spend doing coursework or working as a grad student, it can vary considerably depending on who you are. So I'm an extremely slow student in a lot of ways. So I found myself often, I would have to spend many, many hours, more than 40 hours a week for sure, working on homework assignments and doing TA responsibilities. So that's, certainly more than the typical 9-to-5 job. But for me, a lot of those hours were productive. For others, I know that, you can get away with doing less. And maybe others have been doing more as well. But grad school can certainly be onerous, but it is, a lot of it is, to be cliche, about working smarter and like thinking about what sort of work habits help you succeed.
Yeah, thank you. So it looks like actually someone has a question in the chat that they wanted to be answered. So it says, I know the panelists mentioned previously that in the first 2 years, you spend more time in classes than research. If you come with research background, is it possible to start working with an advisor or lab rotations right away? If anyone has strong thoughts about that, feel free to jump in.
I'll briefly touch on that just to say that yes, you can, and people absolutely do jump in right away. If their background is such that they're capable of doing that, there's really no reason not to, and that's great. I think one thing just we're trying to emphasize here is you don't need to come in with a background where you are able, like most people aren't. I certainly wasn't. Most people do not come into grad school just able to do research. The whole point of grad school isn't just to leave with a PhD, it's to teach you how to do research. So don't feel like, oh, I can't start my first year and write a theoretical stats paper. Like that's really not the perspective you should have. Their job, whatever program you go to, their job is to train you so that you can do these things to the best of your potential. And that's why, like, one of the great things Sarah mentioned earlier, when applying to grad school or choosing whether or not to apply, what they're really looking for is research potential. Like, yeah, if you have 15 publications, that's great, you'll probably get in. But I had none, and I know lots of other people had none when they first applied to grad school. What they're really looking for is research potential. So that's kind of a long way to answer your question, where the short answer is yes, you can start working right away, but you don't need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'll add something. I'll quickly add something to that. You can certainly start researching, but at least at UW, you probably won't have time for it. Like, these courses are pretty tough, and you're gonna spend like what Peter said, like more than 40 hours a week on like RA, TA responsibilities on top of coursework. So if you can do research on top of that, like, props to you. I certainly couldn't, and I knew a lot of people in my cohort also couldn't. But there are some superstars that can. So that's your answer.
Yeah. Sorry. I think to add to that, like, keep in mind you have 5 years. Like, you don't need to start off right away by doing everything. I think people can work really hard their first like quarter or two and then get pretty burnt out. I think it's important just to remember it's like a long process, and like you're gonna get all the things out of it that you need if you decide to go all the way through with it, which you don't have to. It's totally fine to drop out if you decide that's what's best for you. Like, I think there's a stigma about like leaving with a master's, but like doing a PhD can be a really good way to get a master's for free and like figure out like, is a full PhD right for me? I think that is a solid option. But sorry. Anyway, I think it's important to remember, like, you don't need to like publish papers your first year. Like, you have time for that later on. And I think in respect to like how many hours you work per week, for me, I found it's really important like not to compare myself to other people, like especially my first year. I think I thought a lot about like oh, I'm spending so many more hours than this other person, so like I'm like taking too long to understand this. But also sometimes I would feel guilty about like not spending the extra hours. And I think the important thing to come back to is like the goal of your courses in grad school is to like learn material that you'll apply as a researcher. Like, you don't necessarily need to like learn everything perfectly, and for different people, like they might need different things from different courses. Like for me, I'm not going to do theoretical statistics, so I didn't feel like I needed to do like 100% of my homework for those like theoretical classes, versus some people who might be interested in that field do need to. So I think it's important to like think about like what can these courses give me, and not necessarily like that's not necessarily the same thing as for all of your peers.
I just want to add something really quick to what Sarah said. Yeah, the goal of the courses is to teach you like statistics so that you can apply it to your research. I think the emphasis on grades specifically is a lot lower in grad school. So like I don't think like internship or job applications when you're applying as a grad student really pay attention to your grades as much. So maybe that's like a piece of knowledge that might like de-stress some of the pressure on like, you know, performing really well in your classes, which I'm sure all of us experienced in undergrad.
Yeah, so one of the questions in the chat says, what does research potential look like for those who don't know what they're interested in researching? And I know, Anna, you actually mentioned about how when you were applying, you didn't really know exactly what kind of research interests you wanted to look into. So do you have any comments about this question, Anna?
Yeah, sure. So I think like, yeah, so I would say like, if you already know what you want to research and you have some really specific subfield, like, sure, write about that in your statement of purpose. But I think that if you don't know exactly what you're interested in researching, the most important thing to get across in your statement of purpose is just like a general passion. And like, yeah, it doesn't have to be about like a specific field, but like if a program can tell, hey, look, here's someone who has like some math and stats experience in undergrad who really seems passionate, I think they would see that as potential. There might also be opportunities, like this would just be really specific person to person, to like maybe tell a story about you know, some sort of like internship or project or I don't there are ways to show passion, and that's going to be really specific to the person. But basically I would say the way you show research potential, if you don't have specific research interests or experiences, is like general excitement and general passion, because that's what's going to make you a good researcher.
I think it also
Great,
helps
thank you.
show, sorry, Alan.
No, go for it.
Real quick. I think it helps to show like how you've taken advantage of opportunities. Like if your school allows like a senior thesis, like did you take that, or like did you take a class project and like go really far with it and decide like you're really interested in it? I think even if you haven't had like really formal like RUs, like thinking about like what were the opportunities that you had and like how did you use those to like think through the research process can be helpful.
Great, thank you so much. So it looks like some of the questions that weren't answered from the Q&A actually relate to coding. And so coding is a big part of statistics. And I was curious if people had different experiences coming in with varying levels of coding backgrounds. So I believe, Anna, you actually got a degree in computer science. Is that correct? Do you have any thoughts about if that helped you at all, or if that didn't help you very much?
Yeah, so I majored in computer science in undergrad, and I was actually a little disappointed when I got to grad school. So this is maybe UW specific, but just like more generally, I mean, I'm really happy in terms of my research that I know how to code, but in terms of like the way a stats PhD program is like set up, in my opinion, it seems a little outdated. But it seems like our coursework is set up for it to be okay for you to come in without much of a coding background. Like our first year courses don't really have a lot of coding, and then we offer a first year computing course that's taught at like a pretty low level for like not that much previous coding experience. And I was a little bit like, what the heck? Like you can come here and not know anything about coding, and yet you're expected to know everything about Taylor series and calculus. Yeah, so at least the way our program is set up, like if you were to not have a lot of coding experience, you would be okay in our courses. But of course, later on in your research, coding is going to be super important. So the more coding experience you can get now when you have the opportunity, the better. Yeah, so I didn't really use, I feel that I forgot how to program during my first year of grad school.
Yeah, and was anyone here from a background that had less programming involved in their undergraduate? Do you have any thoughts about how that was like trying to adjust to suddenly having to program a little bit?
I guess I'll just add something quickly. Like when I came in, I guess I did take a comp sci class, but it wasn't super, it was at 2:30, which is my nap time. So I did not pay too much attention to it. But I know plenty, like I think I know some like programming snobs that don't count R as a programming language. And I think you can complete a biostat PhD only using R. So like, you know, like I don't really think like coding is like, it depends on like what you want to do, but if you just want to use R, like that's fine. So
I also just want to mention it can make a huge difference depending on like what you want to study. Like I do pretty computational research, and so for me, coding is like absolutely essential in like my research. And that is something that I came to grad school wanting to do. But I have a very good friend who's also graduating this year who does extremely theoretical work and really isn't much of a coder at all, but is like brilliant in many other ways. And for them, like coding was less important. So you don't need to have a coding background coming in. It definitely helps. But like whether you will develop it or not throughout your PhD can depend a lot on what you do. Statistics is such a broad field that you have the opportunity to do anything from basically pure math all the way to like almost at some places, depending on where you go, like more applied like CS type applications.
Great. So I'm seeing a question in the chat about passion for PhD programs and what people are planning on doing after their PhD. So Aniprit, you are one of the most passionate people I know. What kind of made you passionate about pursuing PhD programs, and how did you make that decision? And
Yeah.
I guess also, what are you planning on doing after you earn your PhD?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I know that you are equally passionate as me, so I'll start with that. I think, yeah, I did my undergrad, and I did a similar thing as Peter, like a kind of making my undergrad degree into a master's degree by converting into a 5-year program. So that helped me get some idea about research, but I still wasn't sure whether I really wanted to commit to a PhD, and that is one of the reasons why I decided to explore like working in industry, trying to understand if that is a better fit for me. But like just in 1 year, I was able to understand that corporate like culture is not really a great fit for me, and that was one of the reasons why I applied for a PhD in the first place. I think one of the things what I'm very passionate about is like teaching and promoting diversity in academia and making statistics particularly accessible to as many people as I can. And I think PhD was definitely one of the kind of foundation pillars to achieve that kind of goal for myself. Um, so yeah, that is primarily the reason why I applied for PhD, and also just learning about new cool stuff is fun rather than doing a monotonous thing every day. I think yeah, I think for a post PhD, I'm still like in my 3rd year, so I still have a long way to go. But as I said, I'm very interested in academia, and I would ideally want to have a career in teaching along with doing some research. So, yeah.
And for that second part of the question that asked what you plan on doing after grad school, Brian, I actually know you are pretty close to being done. Do you have any plans for what you're doing, and what's that process like for you?
Yeah, so typically in the last year of your PhD, you're going to be applying for jobs while finishing out your thesis, which is kind of horrible in some ways, but also very exciting. So I personally am looking for faculty positions right now. So I'm going on the job market, and they usually hire almost a full year out. So right now I'm applying for positions to start in the fall of next year. And actually, when you have a PhD, a lot of industry positions do the same thing. So they're like, I don't know how they know, they're big tech companies, but like a lot of headhunters will like find you if you're finishing a PhD and reach out to you and ask you to like interview with them. So I'm kind of going through that a little bit right now as well. So for the most part, I mean, you can do both pretty easily, especially with a field like statistics, which is like one of the more employable fields out there, I think, which is really great. I'm mostly looking at academic positions, but for the most part, like finishing out. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to go back to the question. Oh yeah. Okay. This is just like broadly, like, what are you interested in doing? So for me, I really like teaching, and I enjoy working with undergrads a lot. So I'm looking mostly at like undergraduate focused institutions, and looking for faculty positions. But that's just like one perspective. Yeah, as we've mentioned, and even the people here like have a lot of different perspectives on like what they want to do afterwards.
Great. Well, good luck with that, Brian. We're all wishing you the best. I'm curious to hear what other people are planning on doing after completing their PhD. Angela, do you have different plans?
Yeah, so I'm in my 4th year, and my advisor asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I'm like, aren't I already adult? I don't know. But I think after pondering this for like a few months, I really want to work in government. And there's these positions, and you need to get a PhD in order for a lot of to work in a lot of the positions that the government holds. Specifically, there's this position called a scientific review officer, where you read a lot of grants, and then you or read a lot of titles of grants, and then you organize faculty meetings to discuss and review those grants. And maybe that's not super exciting for a lot of people because it's not super research focused, but it's something that I'm really interested in because I'm able to see like many different research topics and see what like people are interested in around the country. And so yeah, I think that's I guess what I want to do with my PhD.
Thanks, and good luck with that. That sounds super exciting to look over all those grants. Peter, what were you thinking of doing after you complete your PhD?
Similar to Brian, I'm interested in teaching perhaps at the high school or undergraduate level. And in general, I'm also interested in sort of working with, NGOs or governments to my research is on survey statistics. So research in that area interests me. So, I'm in my 4th year. I still don't have a completely clear picture of what I want to do, but I'm definitely not necessarily following the clear-cut path of, work in tech or, try to become a professor. So there are definitely a lot of options out there.
Great. So maybe we can take a couple more questions and then we can sign off. One of the questions I'm seeing right now is about funding, and it didn't have a lot of thumbs up, but I think this is extremely important, so we should probably answer it. It says, did any of you apply for funding, for example, GRFP in your senior year? Could you give some advice on that? How important is getting funding either before starting grad school or in your first few years? So I can actually answer this because I did apply for the GRFP in my senior year of college, and I managed to get it, luckily. But so I think it's not something that's super important because a lot of schools will provide you funding even if you don't have your own, so you can be a TA. But also having a GRFP is really nice because it gives you freedom for what kind of research you want to do. So it allows me to choose what kind of work I want to do, and that's something that is definitely a privilege. I kind of want to also hear about this funding source thing from someone who's actually applying for the GRFP now. I believe, Hassan, you are applying for it this year, right? What thoughts do you have about funding and the GRFP in particular?
Yeah, so I guess the way the rules work now with the GRFP, you can only apply twice, once as an undergrad senior and then once in your first 2 years of grad school. So if you're an undergrad senior, I guess it's too late for me to tell you to apply now as the application is already due. But if you're a junior, I definitely would recommend applying just because you have so few opportunities to apply for the GRFP. But like Alan said, you're usually gonna be guaranteed some sort of funding, at least through your first, I guess at UW, it's first 5 years here. And I think that where that funding comes from may be directly from your advisor or through some sort of like TA-ship. And something that I didn't really understand until I came in here is where your funding comes from isn't necessarily reflective of like your progress in the PhD. So like some quarters or some semesters, you may need to be a TA, and sometimes your advisor may have funding for you. At the end of the day, you're here to learn how to do research and to, go through the process and end up with a dissertation so that you can graduate. Where your funding comes from doesn't really reflect like your progress or your value in terms of like where you are in your PhD. And I think that's like the most important takeaway when it comes to all of this, like whether you get the GRFP or not, or whether you're on a TA-ship or a research advisorship or a research assistantship, you're still going to be a PhD student working towards the same goal as your peers.
I'd like to add something. I think, so I know that finding funding can be extremely stressful if you're not guaranteed it. And I think that is a heavy consideration that a lot of people should make when choosing grad schools. I know that some programs will not guarantee 5 years of funding. And I think that it can be super stressful. And I know it's definitely deterred people from applying to or like choosing programs because of that. So, like even if a program is perfect and all the other things like research interests, etc., like you still have to get paid, and grad students don't get paid a lot. So being paid nothing is even worse, So I think like when you're choosing grad programs, like make sure that they, like when you read your offer letter, that they're offering 5 years, or I don't know, it might be a little difficult for you. I know a lot of grad students in other programs that were really stressed out because they didn't know when their next paycheck was going to come in, and like they had to pay tuition and that kind of stuff. And I don't want anyone to be in that position.
I do think it's worth pointing out that most statistics and biostatistics programs in the country will in the US will do this for you. Like if you get accepted to a statistics or biostatistics PhD program, it is extremely rare for them to not also offer you funding. I mean, so read over your letter carefully, but like don't, I personally would not stress too much about like making sure like that you are set up like we're not paid a lot, but we are paid and our funding is like relatively secure. So just know that like for the most part, if you get into a PhD program, they're gonna fund you. And also this is like a very real difference between master's and PhD programs. Like for me, when I first started out, I actually wanted to do industry and I wanted to do a master's degree, but I couldn't afford it. And so I applied to PhD programs because they pay you. And I thought, well, if I want a master's, I can just drop out with the master's. Turns out I wanted to stay, but it is something worth considering, is that if you get into a PhD program, you're pretty much always funded versus a master's program. You are almost always not.
Cool. Well, it is getting.
Wait,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. One thing on that, I'm not exactly sure, but all the programs that did end up accepting me also gave me health insurance. I'm pretty sure that's common throughout institutions in the US, but just so you're aware, like make sure you also ask about health insurance and that you're covered for the duration of your PhD.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it is getting close to 5:30. So I think it'd be kind of a good time to wrap it up, just to be respectful of all the panelists' time as well. So the funding question seems like a bad question as a conclusionary question. So I found a question that I thought maybe would be a better conclusionary question. It's, what are some things you wish you had done differently in grad school? And
that's better.
Yeah, so if anyone has any particular thoughts, why don't you jump in, and maybe this can be our last question before we leave you all.
I think I wish I had started working with my classmates sooner. Through like my first quarter, I really thought I had to like do my homework alone to like make sure I like do it right. But I think like a huge source of support for me in my first year was my cohort, both like to do work with and also like to become friends with. And like I think it's important moving to a new place to like build those emotional connections. So I think like take advantage of your peers, both through work and also just like as people to I don't know, get to know and like help you out.
Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Sure. So my advice is pretty general. It's just, grad school is a bit of a marathon, right? It's 5 to 6 years. And, a lot of people will be asking the questions like, oh, will this pay off? And I don't think that's necessarily the right question to ask. Like, I think the lesson I've learned in grad school is you always kind of need to be constantly asking yourself sort of like, am I enjoying this? Am I putting myself in a place where I can sort of make this a sustainable lifestyle? And, that's just my general advice for a PhD. Like, it is difficult, no doubt, but you should always try your best to set yourself up for success by making sure you have time for, making sure you have a healthy work-life balance and trying to find enjoyment in the struggle of it is all as well. Yeah.
I would say just like don't sell yourself short, and like try lots of things. So like I feel like this has come up in I've been reminded of this in lots of the questions that have like come up in this panel. But like when I was a senior in college, I was like, oh, I shouldn't apply for this NSF thing because like I don't even know what I want to research. So like what would I write about? But actually trying your senior year does not count against you for trying in grad school. So that was kind of dumb. And then my first year of grad school, I was like, oh, well, I don't have an advisor yet. I can't apply, whatever. So like I did some like not applying to things. Like I sort of like, I didn't even consider biostats programs when I was applying because I was like, well, I don't do biology. And looking back, I'm like, oh, I probably could have gone to a I don't regret being in stats, but like there have just been lots in finding an advisor. I was very scared to email people. So I was actually a little late to the advisor game because like I just thought that professors were scary. And then I finally like emailed someone to start working with them, and it's going well. So yeah, don't wait to do things because you're scared of them.
I have two things because I made a lot of mistakes in grad school, I think. First is that especially in your early years, I think there's this like tendency for undergrads, especially for undergrads who are the type of students who are motivated to go on to PhD and spend 5 more years in school, that like you need to be at the top of all your classes. You need to be like acing every test. You need to do 100% of every homework. And for a PhD, that's not really as true. It's all there just to like educate you. And so one thing you should prioritize that I wish I had prioritized more in my first year is sleep and fun things. Like it's really important that you are doing something that is sustainable for you and that you like. So make sure that make sure that you're prioritizing that for yourself, just in terms of work-life balance. And then also like talk to your peers about like your experience in the program. Like I felt imposter syndrome is a very real thing that I'm guessing pretty much everyone on this panel has felt at least some point, if not right now, throughout their PhD. And it can be really hard to deal with because you feel like you're the only one. But when I started talking to other people about my experience, I realized that like this isn't as like lonely or isolating as I thought. Feeling like I'm struggling or feeling like I'm constantly behind. I hate to say it, but it's almost just like a part of the process. And don't be afraid to like talk about those things because most other people are probably feeling them too.
What I would add on to that is also a lot of universities have really great counseling resources also available to grad students. I think I probably would have been happier sooner had I accessed those resources earlier. And yeah, definitely talk to your peers about it. I think the stigma around that, fortunately, is lessening every year, but it's still a real thing. It's something that a lot of grad students go through, and I would encourage you to use those resources whenever you think you need them, or whenever you think they might even just be, slightly helpful for you.
Okay, does anyone have any final thoughts? If not, maybe we can all give a wave and say goodbye. It was really nice for everyone to be here. Thank you so much for all of your questions, and we hope you got something out of it.
And good luck for your applications.
Bye, everyone. We'll make this recording available somewhere online, which we will disseminate. We've been working with the people through statsphd.com, so it'll probably be available on there as well as on the UW website, I think. So, goodbye.